to the 12th meeting of the Special Committee on the Economic Relationship between Canada and the United States. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on February 16, 2021, the Special Committee is meeting to discuss the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Today, we are continuing our examination of Buy America procurement policies, and we will finish the meeting in camera in order to get some drafting instructions from the members. I would like now to warmly welcome our witnesses for the first panel. From Add Energy Technology, Inc., we have Travis Allen, Vice President, Public Affairs and General Counsel. From the Canadian Canola Growers Association, we have Dave Carey, Vice President, Government and Industry Relations. And we have Janelle Whitley, Manager, Policy Development. From IPEX Management Incorporated, we have Vizo Sobot, Director and Government Affairs and Public Relations. So, Mr. Allen, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Bonsoir à tous.
Good evening, everyone.
To you and to the committee members for this opportunity to contribute to your study on the recent U.S. executive order for more stringent Buy America measures. Nous apprécions sincèrement.
We sincerely appreciate having this opportunity to share our comments on the subject with you.
A Quebec-based company and a North American leader in electric vehicle charging solutions. We are vertically integrated, manufacturing our stations at our plant in Shawinigan, while also operating Flow, which is the network that connects our charging stations at our head office in Quebec City. Our software and R&D operations are divided between Montreal and Quebec. And since 2009, we've grown to over 210 direct jobs, and we procure approximately 85% of our expenses from Canadian suppliers. Add Energy is a proud Canadian clean tech exporter as well. And to support our growth and complement our production capacity in Quebec, it is our intention to build a plant in the United States. We also plan to participate in what is likely to be the largest deployment of EV charging stations in North American history, namely 500,000 EV charging stations by 2030, proposed under the American Jobs Plan. We are concerned that current or potentially enhanced Buy America measures may significantly hamper U.S. transportation electrification and impact Canadian companies working toward that goal if they are applied to Canadian-made EV charging stations. For our American allies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030, as President Biden has proposed, it is crucial that they have access as soon as possible to a highly competitive and reliable supply of clean technology and clean energy from trusted companies on both sides of the border. And we think that Add Energy is one of these competitive and reliable companies. We deliver our high quality charging solutions from the Yukon all the way to Los Angeles. Our products, we've sold over 40,000 charging stations, can handle extreme conditions from -40 to +50, freezing rain and snowstorms. And our key suppliers are based in North America, which means a shorter supply chain, better sheltered from global shocks. But our concern with the application of the Buy America regime is based first on its impact on the cost of production, and second on risks that it will be inconsistently applied or implemented too rapidly for us to fairly and effectively compete. On the issue of cost, broader Buy America rules, if applied to EV charging, could and will limit our ability to produce stations in an efficient and integrated way. Requiring all stations to be manufactured in the United States, for example, using 100% US components, would likely duplicate production lines, hike production costs across the industry, and ultimately increase the burden on US taxpayers to achieve procurement goals. We're concerned also about the timing and clarity of any changes proposed to current Buy America rules. At this time, we are unable to predict how Buy America requirements will be applied by different departments and agencies as funding gets earmarked to support transportation electrification. And depending on how Buy America is interpreted to apply to stations, it could take many months, if not years, to adjust our supply chain appropriately. And then even once supply chain issues are addressed, we're likely to require recertification of our products, which adds still more time before we can get them to market. In other words, hasty or overbroad implementation of enhanced Buy America requirements is likely to increase costs, slow down delivery, and reduce the options available to U.S. purchasers, none of which helps achieve the United States emissions reduction, and all of which are negative for Canada's clean tech export sector. To be clear, we genuinely believe in free trade and the role competition plays in this space. What we're asking for is the same access to the US market that Canada provides to our US competitors, both to public procurement and to government incentives. Canada is making important efforts to expand its own greening government efforts, and we hope that just as we have welcomed US competition in Canada, the US will welcome Canadian products in its market. For these reasons, we hope the Canadian government will work closely with our American allies to address Buy America measures with respect to clean tech exports, including EV charging. And this includes promoting Canada and its clean tech exporters as a trusted and reliable partner in support of US climate objectives and infrastructure programs. Ideally, the United States would interpret Buy America as not applying to Canadian EV charging stations, or if it's found to apply, an exemption or a waiver for Canadian stations would allow us to achieve maximum economies of scale and provide the best value for folks on both sides of the border. Ad Energy appreciates the opportunity to share how an exemption to the Buy America regime or waiver could allow us to further contribute to the reduction of transportation emissions and the clean tech manufacturing sector on both sides of the border. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Merci, vos questions sont les bienvenues.
Thank you, and your questions are welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. We'll now go to Mr. Carey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to appear before this special committee. As mentioned, my name is Dave Carey. I'm the Canadian Canola Growers Association's Vice President, Government and Industry Relations, based here in Ottawa. I'm also joined by my colleague Janelle Whiteley in Winnipeg, who leads our policy development on international trade. We're the National Association of Canada's 43,000 canola farmers, representing them on issues, policies, and programs that impact their farm success. Developed in Canada, canola is a staple of Canadian agriculture, as well as Canadian science and innovation. Today, it is Canada's most widely planted crop and is the largest farm cash receipt of any agricultural commodity, earning Canadian farmers over $10.2 billion in 2020. Annually, the canola sector contributes $29.9 billion to the Canadian economy and provides for 207,000 jobs. The U.S. is our largest export market, accounting for roughly 30% of our seed, oil, and meal exports in 2020. Canola is harvested for its seed, which is then processed into oil and meal. In 2020, Canada sold $3.7 billion of canola to the United States, $2 billion in oil, and $1.3 billion in meal. The U.S. purchases 50% and 70% of our total oil and meal exports, respectively. North America is an integrated market. Is an integrated agriculture market with many of our industry partners operating in both Canada and the United States. Canola products are critical inputs into U.S. food and feed supply chains. For example, canola's heart-healthy oil is an important ingredient in consumer food products. The geographic proximity of our markets and vertically integrated North American agribusiness sector is well positioned to serve our respective markets. Underpinning our economic relationship is the CAAM. We were encouraged by its implementation in July 2020, as it preserved our market access and restored predictability and certainty. At present, canola faces little in the way of barriers. Since NAFTA's implementation, canola sales to the U.S. have grown, significantly driving the development of our sector here in Canada. Strong U.S. canola oil and meal demand supports our value-added sector. Today, a network of 14 oilseed facilities process seed here at home. Maintaining value added in Canada is an integral component of canola's $29.9 billion contribution to the Canadian economy. Furthermore, many of these processing facilities are in rural Canada, supporting local communities, sustaining rural employment, and providing sales opportunities for our farmers. Appreciate that the study is focused on Buy America and other associated issues. Buy America and President Biden's plan to tighten requirements have not yet impacted our farmers. Canola is sold into the private market, and our largest sector has no direct involvement with government procurement or assistance. That said, farmers require stable, understood rules of trade. They establish a certainty in markets and the requirements for doing business, enable investment and reduce risk, as well as the cost. Stable market access also includes streamlined and aligned regulatory processes, particularly for crop protection products and seed varieties enhanced through biotechnology. An increasing market of interest for canola farmers is biodiesel. Canola is a high-quality feedstock as both of our countries seek a cleaner and green future. Farmers can help meet the growing need for low-carbon biofuels on this continent. The free flow of biofuels, their feedstocks, and finished fuels is thus important. As both our countries develop and implement strengthened policies targeting the environmental profile of liquid fuels, we cannot imperil this trade environment. The forthcoming Canadian clean fuel regulations need to ensure that it does not negatively impact the free trade we currently enjoy. Recently announced major investments in increasing canola crushing capacity and the potential for large-scale investment in diesel biofuel production in Canada will be used by commercial parties to not only satisfy their regulatory obligations in Canada, but to provide feedstock and biofuels to U.S. customers as well. We look forward to your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Now we will go to Mr. Sobat. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly for 5 minutes, please. You're muted, sir. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize. I'm an engineer with IPEX. We're based in Oakville, Ontario. We make black plumbing pipe under your sink, the gray pipe that brings power to your house, the blue pipe that brings clean water to your tap, the green pipe that takes your sewage away, as well as many other pipes that are used in hospitals, commercial, and industrial construction. We were founded in 1949 by a fearless Estonian. He rented a house in downtown Toronto, started making hula hoops at night and selling them during the day. And by 1953, hula hoops were everywhere. Always innovating, sensing the hula hoop might be a fad. He straightened out the hula hoop, and that's how we got into the pipe business. By the way, he also invented those red gas cans you see absolutely everywhere. Today, IPEX exports to 66 countries from our 15 plants in Canada and our 10 plants in the United States, with thousands of dedicated team members. Growth for us in America has been very robust. Usmaka, or Kuzma, as we call it, has been very helpful in many respects. But contrary to common belief, it does not protect us from Buy America. Canadian companies continue to be blocked on U.S. federal funded infrastructure projects, while American firms have unfettered access to Canada. Ironically, IPEX buys American all day long. Our products are made from American resin. Natural gas, often from Canada, makes it down to the U.S., where it's cracked into ethylene and combined with chlorine from salt, and the pellets come back to Canada, where they're used to make long-life products such as siding, windows, soffits, decking, fencing, and of course, in our case, pipe. Last year, 18% of all U.S. vinyl resin production came to Canada. China was their second biggest customer at 10.1%. Mexico was its third biggest customer at 10%. This year, it's expected that Canada will be bigger than China and Mexico combined. We are America's biggest customer. And yet, we are being prevented from shipping finished goods back into the United States, even though there's a shortage in the U.S. Currently. Prime Minister Harper successfully secured an exemption to Buy America in February 2010 with President Obama. We think the time is right for Prime Minister Trudeau to do the same with President Biden. It's in America's best interest to use Canadian vinyl products rather than Chinese. We share similar laws, regulations, business practices, and environmental protections. More importantly, we're allies. The focus on green infrastructure in both countries is another reason Canadian products should qualify for an exemption to Buy America. An example of the beneficial Canada-U.S. trade relationship can be found in Burton, Michigan, just outside of Flint. Over the last 6 years, Burton has worked to remove lead in their water supply. After careful due diligence, Burton embarked on a 19-mile water main replacement program using a Canadian innovation, biaxially oriented lead-free vinyl pipe, which conserves resources by using significantly less material, reducing its environmental footprint while providing high strength. The pipe was made in Saint-Laurent, Quebec, just outside of Montreal, using Unifor union labor and installed by LiUNA members on the opposite side of the border. Burton has now cleaner water, minimized its environmental footprint, and saved $2.1 million using Canadian innovative products. Indeed, A 2018 Utah State University study confirmed Burton's prudent decision. The study showed break rates for Canadian vinyl pipe are best in class, inferring there's a great benefit for American municipalities to use innovative Canadian technology for infrastructure renewal. We also make a seismic pipe used in earthquake-prone zones. It was developed and tested with the help of University Seismic Laboratory Lab in Ithaca, New York. The pipes are now all used along the U.S. West Coast. I've shared just 2 examples this evening, but as you can appreciate, I could have shared hundreds had we had time. In conclusion, we urge the committee to work for an exemption to Buy America so the benefits of free and fair trade can be mutually maximized for both countries post-COVID. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Sabat. Mr. Sabat, we will definitely start the questioning round with Mr. Lewis for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly appreciate that. And thank you to all of the witnesses. Excellent testimony this evening. Mr. Sabat, that was pretty remarkable. Seismic pipe, that's something that just blows my mind. That's fantastic. Sir, to you first, but of course through our chair, you had mentioned about bringing in little pellets from the United States. So in essence, would it make sense that in order to buy American, we have to buy American first to bring it to Canada to indeed turn around and sell it back to the United States? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I said we feel we buy American all day long. Most of the pellets come from the United States. And what we do is we convert it into useful construction materials. It would seem to me that Canada should have an exemption to Buy America, like we did have back in 2010. I figure, if Harper could do it with Obama, Trudeau should be able to do it with Biden. They're more ideologically congruent. It's in America's best interest, and I think if they were not to give us an exemption, it would be terrible if we had to look elsewhere for our raw materials.
Understand. And through you again, Mr. Chair, back to the same witness, please. So I think majority of us around this table will agree that the chance for recovery, COVID-19 recovery specifically, is going to be through infrastructure. And the one thing that we know for sure is our sewers, our drinking water, all the things that really require pipe, that is not going away. As a matter of fact, we're going to need more and more of it all the time. And so the opportunity here to really work with our greatest trading partner, the United States of America, what kind of an impact would it be if, to our United States friends, if your company couldn't export to them under fair trading role models?
Well, they'd lose business, quite frankly. There is a shortage of pipe in the United States right now. Canada always has served historically as a relief valve for their economy when their economy got too hot. And we've always served a useful purpose in that regard. If we cannot ship the finished pipe back into the United States, they will have to buy from somewhere else, and they'll probably be buying from China. And I can't see how that's better for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you again to the same witness. I'm sorry to pick on you, sir, but you really intrigued me there. So what specifically can this committee do to help your industry, but to help, of course, Canada and this whole relation? Is there something very specific that you could perhaps share with this committee?
Well, I think what we really should be doing is talking with USTR, making sure that the lines of communication are open. Back in 2009, 2010, when we were cut out the first time, Prime Minister Harper invited all U.S. manufacturers that had plants in Canada to the Canadian Embassy. And then he had a little discussion with them. He said to them, and they were, by the way, having a difficult time shipping their product back that they made in Canada back into the United States. And he made it clear that that was an unintended consequence of Buy America. And he asked them all to go back to President Obama to tell them about the unintended consequences and the damage it was doing to American companies. And that was very effective. A lot of American companies ship into Canada. If we started doing the same to them as they did to us, I think they'd run back to their congressmen and senators right away and say, hey, we got to fix this problem, because quite frankly, they need our markets. They want our markets. And reciprocal trade is the core of free and fair trade.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time left, please, sir?
A minute, 45 seconds.
Oh, excellent. Wow, this is awesome. Just going back to the same witness, please, Mr. Sabat. So I'm kind of intrigued on those little pellets. Is there any opportunity for to perhaps purchase from a Canadian supplier, or does it have to be purchased through United States suppliers?
In the past, we have bought from a Canadian supplier based in Niagara Falls, Ontario. There are only 4 or 5 major resin suppliers in North America. And it's just over the last 30 years, our supply chains have evolved in such a way that we're buying from the Americans right now. And quite frankly, right now, there is a shortage of pellets in the marketplace. So our existing supply chains are very important. We're sort of stuck with them right now. Certainly, if we were ever to develop some of our resources here in Canada, we'd be very amenable to buying, more Canadian goods. In the meantime, we have to resort to, alternate suppliers, even in Europe, for example.
Thank you.
30 seconds, Mr. Lewis. Question and answer, please. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just final thought. I was really intrigued when he had mentioned about removing lead from our water lines. And I know that in Flint, Michigan, there was a major issue there, continues to be. Just wondered on, I do believe still that you had mentioned it was kind of Canadian technology, and what this relationship continues to be for the United States.
Short answer, Mr. Sabat, please.
The mayor of Burton, Paula Zelenko, a great lady, did extraordinary research on what was the best option for them moving forward. Flint has moved in this direction too. If you recall, years ago, they had a lead problem. They're going this way too. Canadian solutions for American problems. I think that's a great example.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll now go to Mr. McKay for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Last night, I was on House duty, and as long as you don't tell anybody, Mr. Chair, I didn't entirely participate in House duty. Rather, I watched President Biden make his speech last night. And if there was any doubt about the intentions of the American president, he certainly laid them to rest. Last night, where he even made said the phrase that he'd be telling his secretaries not to be granting any exemptions. So I think we're in a very difficult situation, and Mr. Sabat, you seem to be a very popular witness today. So I'll direct the question first to you and then to Mr. Allen. I once sat at a breakfast with possibly as one of your competitors who was selling PCV pipe into the United States to an American military installation. And under that particular exercise, where we have a exemption for military goods, somebody got the idea that this was Canadian pipe, and after it was already installed, it got ripped up.
Right.
So I'm assuming. So if in fact no exemption is granted, what is Plan B for your company?
Sure. Well, first off, John, I want to say hello. I lived on 2 South Marine Drive for many, many years, and you knock on my door frequently.
Oh,
and
really?
we chat long chats about the issue of the day. So great to see you.
Oh my goodness! I'm sorry I didn't recognize. Yeah. Were you the guy I had breakfast with?
Yes.
Okay, so I remembered your story. Yeah,
that's right.
That's hilarious.
We have a plant up at 807 Pharmacy in Scarborough, right by Eglinton and Victoria Park there, and we've had that plant there since 1953. So yes, you were wonderful when we had that conversation. In fact, what happened there was it was at Camp Pendleton. They exhumed our fittings.
Right.
They stopped the project for a month. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays, replaced our fittings with fittings that were made in the United States that were identical to ours. And all the while, we were covered under NAFTA. They didn't have the right to do that and didn't do that, or shouldn't have done that. So in the end, that was a compelling story that the Prime Minister shared with the President. And that's one of the reasons I think we got the exemption, because it didn't make sense. It was hurting the Americans. It was hurting us. No one was winning in the whole process. What's our plan B? Unfortunately, it's build more plants in the United States, right? Buy America. I'm a Canadian. I love Canada. Our founders loved Canada. They escaped from Estonia. They ran from the Russians. I would prefer that we make those investments in Canada. I really would, and I hope we can. And I think we can. If Harper and Obama could come to an agreement, I'm sure Trudeau and Biden can.
I must admit, after playing hooky on house duty last night, I'm maybe not quite as convinced. He was pretty strong, but Mr. Allen, you have also set up a plan B, which is putting more factories into the U.S. I'm assuming that that's a considerable investment. How far advanced are you in that planning, if in fact this scenario turns out to be as grim as we think it might be?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We're pretty advanced, so we've undertaken an RFI process, and gone through the whole process of asking different states, how committed they are to electrification, and analyzing all the different cost factors that influence that decision. And honestly, the decision to build the factory in the US is also partially about showing that we are committed to the US market, and we want to be part of helping that economy as well sort of benefit from the opportunities with electrification. But for us, the really big distinction is, can we do this in an efficient way, like the auto sector does, right? Which is a sort of an integrated continental manufacturing structure, where maybe you produce one product line in the US and we would continue to produce most here in Canada. Can we do that in a way that's good for consumers and good for our economy? Or do we have to do it in a way that's duplicative, raises costs, has double product lines built in Canada and the United States, and basically raises costs for everyone? And that is number one concern, I would say, on our radar right now. Number two, and I think Mr. Spott's story is just such a great concrete illustration of the wild things that happen when you have a protectionist system like this that is just so open to misinterpretation or misapplication by different levels of government that are interpreting it. So that's another thing we're very concerned about.
Yeah.
Mr. McKay, 20 seconds.
I'll just say that, Mr. Sabat, you and I should have another breakfast. It's the kind of story that sticks in your mind. The logic and the sense of what the Americans propose doing to either canola or to your industry or to the Allen doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But we are where we are.
It would be an honor to have breakfast with you again, and you just name the place and time.
Okay. If we get the exemption, you buy. If we don't get the exemption,
deal.
You buy.
Deal.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wish to welcome all the witnesses and also my colleagues. I would like to ask Mr. Allen, whom I acknowledge, I appreciate the contribution of Ad Energy to the electrification of transport, an issue that's important to me. You know that in my riding, normally on an annual basis, we have a very large electric car show that is usually a big success, and I imagine that Ad Energy has participated in it, so it will be a pleasure too, and I look forward to seeing you in person perhaps at the next edition, even if it may seem strange today. I'd like to shake hands with you then, but in view of the fact that you promote a form of exemption for the American market, which could take the form of an agreement on green technologies, I imagine. What is the situation of American strength in that field as compared to Canadian strength if we compare the two? In other words, to give us an idea if there are some calls for tenders or public contracts, public procurement, which of the two countries would be able to come out of it better as regards these types of contracts or calls for tender?
Thank you. And I am so excited to get out of my Halliburton living room and get out to a real EV auto show again. And I really look forward to that. We have some very strong competition in the United States. And I would never mislead you about that. There are some great companies. And I'm proud to say that Canada and Quebec have managed to also field an absolute, world leader in this area. And so it is, we don't win them all, but we win a lot of the competitions. And that is exactly it. We want to be able to compete fairly. We think we can win. We think our technology is as good. And frankly, we're really excited to be able to compete. The challenge being getting to compete, of course.
Would you say that the expertise in both countries, once again between Canada and the US, are at the same level in the area of electrification and green technologies, or are there certain niche areas, if you could call it that?
I think Canada has been a real early leader, particularly around charging stations, around medium and heavy duty electrification. We have some really excellent companies in that regard. And one of the things that we are concerned about for the United States is that if they're trying to hit these 2030 targets without having Canadian production, access to Canadian production, it's going to be very hard for them to meet those targets. I think that's a real risk.
Why would it be difficult for them? A lack of expertise or not enough companies?
Their domestic manufacturing is, I would say, more limited than in Canada. And I think a number of the companies in the space are going to have to deal with the same supply chain issues that I mentioned before in terms of trying to figure out how to meet Buy America rules. And so I do think that there will be some challenges meeting their targets because of that.
And what is the nature of most of the companies operating in that field in the US? We know that in Canada, to a large extent, it relies on small and medium businesses, including a lot of them in Quebec. In the US, are they more multinationals or more small and medium businesses?
In the United States, there is a combination of large global players, both from domestic players largely based out of California in the charging space, and also some medium duty growing companies. And then there is increasingly large European and also Chinese manufacturers who are starting to sell into the market. And in some cases, they are also starting to build plants in the United States.
I understand that in view of the fact that there may be large Chinese companies that would also like to get access to those major public contracts, we may thus suppose that what you're proposing is not an absence of the Buy American Act, but rather truly a Buy American Act that would give Canada a special place because a broader opening would allow those large Chinese companies to have greater access.
I think that's a really excellent way of putting it. I mean, given the history of trade agreements between our two countries and the fact that Americans, are accessing 9% of Canadian government procurements compared to a much smaller amount by Canadians, I think it is very reasonable for the United States to carve out Canada as a special ally in this case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have left? 30 seconds. 30 seconds? Well, I'll yield my remaining 30 seconds to the next speaker.
Merci,
Thank you, Mr. Sarah-Tremblay.
You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the witnesses here today. Again, it's been a very interesting time already. I've really learned a lot. I especially enjoyed the story about hula hoops, which I will try to use in some form in the future. But I'm going to start with Mr. Carey. And if, I don't want to make a make him think that we've forgotten all about canola. I usually sit on the Natural Resources Committee. We're talking about clean fuels, including biodiesel. He mentioned biodiesel. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Kerr, if you could maybe tell us how much of the canola production in Canada that's exported goes to biodiesel, or just the proportion that is used for biodiesel right now within Canada.
Yeah, no, great question. On an annual basis, there's approximately 20 million tons of canola produced annually. We've about 10 million tons of that is now value added. It's crushed at a processing facility instead of being sold as the raw product as seed. Quite frankly, our two biggest export markets when it comes to biofuels would be both to satisfy, one to satisfy our domestic market. About $640 odd million a year go to the European Union, and that's really driven by their strong demand for canola-based biofuels. And the United States, it'd be a combination of oil for cooking, for other value-added. But we do think that if we got that clean fuel regulation, as you alluded to, correct, that could be another 1.3 million tons annually that would be crushed here, roughly the size of our Japanese export market. So biofuels have been critical as far as hedging against trade volatility.
So again, when we're talking about the United States now, what are the clean fuel regulations there? How does biodiesel play into that market? And what role can Canada play to supply that market? And how does Buy America? I guess I'm trying to figure out how canola fits into the Buy America situation.
Absolutely. Right, we've had 10 years of reciprocal aggregate compliance between the United States EPA and Canada's Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that recognizes both of our markets' production practices as sustainable. Unfettered access across that 49th parallel is critical for canola. Canada controls 60% of the world's canola to be able to move unfettered into the United States. So the big concern, Mr. Kennings and Mr. Chair, around Buy America is that we rely on the United States. 90% of canola grown in Canada is exported. That was $11.9 billion in 2020. We rely on the United States as a global partner to promote rules-based trade. We rely on them to promote World Trade Organization. We rely on them to promote that post-COVID that we cannot have the rise of protectionism. So Buy America is concerning for canola as an export-oriented crop, concerning for Canada as a middle power, that if our biggest trading nation no longer respects rules-based trade, that's a really strong signal as we're trying to reform the appellate body of the World Trade Organization, as we look at the Ottawa Group. So we're here from an existential sort of perspective. As post-COVID-19, we've seen all these rise in protectionism. We need to make sure we get back to what makes Canada great, which is an exporting nation, as fellow witnesses have said. So we don't want to alienate the United States, but we also need to make sure we take them to task, that we can't hold China responsible for their trade issues if the United States isn't willing to step up. So that's, I guess, our critical concern, sir.
Okay, thank you. And how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Cannings.
Okay, I'll turn to Mr. Sabat again, and I'm just wondering about, again, for when I'm thinking of this from a natural resources point of view, one of the big disagreements we've had with the United States, and I talked about this last time I was on this committee, and that's the softwood lumber disagreement, and how that whole situation is one of the major reasons we have such soaring lumber prices in Canada, for instance, and across North America. And we use that argument in the United States, to say, why do you punish us? You're only punishing yourself. You're making it much more expensive to build houses, to do everything. And yet that doesn't seem to gain enough traction. I'm just wondering if there's any argument there with, for instance, your pipe. Is that something that if you were excluded from the U.S. market, that would affect prices in any way? And can we use that argument with the United States?
Yes, Mr. Cannings, that's exactly right. If we were not to supply the U.S. market with their raw material, right, their prices would go up drastically. And quite frankly, what's happened in our marketplace is products have gone up 60% because of raw material increases over the last couple of months. So it would be hurting them, there's no question. The protection against that is fair and open competition. Allow as many products as you can, have fair and open competition, the price will come down. That's what Burton, Michigan found. They found when they opened up competition, we won the bid, that they saved $2.1 million over the next competing bid. Mayor Zelenko, a Democrat there, recognized that, didn't mind that it came from Canada. She sat on the International Trade Committee, by the way, for Canada and the United States when she was in the state legislature. And she saw Canada as a valuable ally, not as a competitor. One of the reasons we got an... Sorry,
Mr.
go ahead.
Sabat, very quickly, please. We're really short of time today.
One of the ways we got the exemption last time was we found out that there is an American competitor that had the exclusive domain in Canada. And they were the ones who were behind the Buy America initiative. They paid literally millions of dollars to their congressman to get Buy America written in. When that was found out, the Canadian embassy worked very diligently and brilliantly and brought them into the embassy. And they signed a letter that said that they were worried about China, not Canada. And that was really an important point. And that's what changed the game. That letter was given to USTR and the President of the United States, and that's how Canada got the exemption.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Now we'll go to our second round to Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here on a Thursday evening. Mr. Carey, I'll start off with you. I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm really excited in Saskatchewan and Canola, and you can understand why we see another $1 billion going to be invested in Saskatchewan. 3 new facilities opening up. In fact, we're going to be in a scenario probably where we won't have enough raw product in the province of Saskatchewan, so we're going to have to pull out of Manitoba and Alberta and North Dakota. Now, with Buy America, I'm just trying to understand, what does that do for the actual construction costs for these facilities? Because Mr. Sabat, I'm going to ask you about the price of your pipe right now here pretty quick, but as we see, a shortage in lumber, shortage in cement, shortage in steel, what does that mean for these plants and them expanding at this point in time? And then does that concern you?
Well, thanks for the question. Admittedly, Mr. Hoback, being farmer rep, it's hard to know sort of what the processors are, but I can certainly commit to getting back to you and the clerk in writing and speak with COPA, who represent those. I know that they're very bullish on this as far as that $1 billion investment in Regina. But I think it speaks to, as my fellow witnesses have said, that Canada needs an we need an exemption from this. I think we have a special trading relationship that we're so integrated that if there's not an exemption, it will certainly make life more difficult as these processing plants, billions of dollars invested in Regina and other places that they'll create, their operating costs will certainly increase. And I think it just, for farmers' perspective, it just more trade volatility is not what we need these days. And so I can certainly commit to speaking with Chris at COPA and getting back to Mr. Hoback, but it's concerning when the United States isn't following, rules-based trade for sure, for all those reasons we've alluded to.
Yeah, and I guess it just, as we hear President Biden talk about his environmental plan and how we're supposed to be on the same page and try to create a North American environmental plan with biofuels somehow fitting into that, it's going to be interesting to see if they come up to our standards, because we've already leaped ahead of them quite a bit already, or if we're actually going to lower our standards to meet theirs. So there's some things to learn here. Mr. Sabat, I'm going to go to you. PEX Pipe, man, your shortage in Canada. Why should I feel sorry that you can't sell into the U.S. if you can't even supply the market already in Canada? I'm just a hypothetical question.
The shortage in Canada for PEX Pipe, we think that the shortage is temporary. The shortage was created because all the chemical plants in Louisiana and Texas went down in that big ice storm. We think that things are going to go back to normal in June. Okay. We're not asking you to be sorry for us, Mr. Hoback. We're just explaining the lay of the land. That's all.
How do you explain this then? We see this $2 trillion to get the economy going again. We see $100 billion talked about here in Canada for stimulus. Yeah, like I said, lumber, good luck. OSB, when you look at construction materials, and the cost of housing is actually starting to really inflate. Are we just not adding more fuel to a fire that necessarily doesn't need it?
Well, this has been puzzling me. I don't understand why there's so much inflation out there right now. I hope it's not because the government's printing money. If that's the case, we're in big trouble because we're going to have a tough 2, 3, 4 years, trade or no trade. But I don't think that's what's going on right now, not in the plastic sector. Anyway. The plastics sector was hit with very bad weather, as I mentioned before, and everybody's going to be back online by June.
Okay. And then as far as as we see this program unwind in the U.S. and our stimulus here in Canada, if you feel that you have to be in the U.S., will that mean you'll be shutting plants down in Canada and fulfilling the Canadian marketplace out of your plants and new facilities in the U.S. in order to take advantage of Buy America? Because you can, obviously, like you said, you can build in the U.S. and ship to Canada all you want, but you can't go the other way.
Yeah. That's my worry. We have 15 plants in Canada now, 10 in the United States. We'll be making investments on both sides of the border this year. We have significant investments planned. I'm worried that the economic circumstances will be such that it'll be more profitable for us to invest in America rather than Canada. And that's what I worried about. I've been with the company 31 years. I'd like to see another fantastic 5 years of growth in Canada and the United States. I don't want Canada to lose out on opportunities.
Now, you talked about Harper and Obama.
Mr. Holback, 15 seconds question. Sorry, 15 seconds.
You know what? I will stop there, Chair, instead of starting a new round. But Mr. Sabat, I will say this. I'll buy you lunch. John can buy you dinner, breakfast. I'll buy you lunch. How's that?
Deal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holback. Madame Romanado, vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
5 minutes, please.
Before I begin, I want to say hello again to Mr. Carey as chair of the Industry, Science and Technology Committee. I know you presented to us earlier this week, so it's a pleasure to see you again. It's tough going, in the second round because people get to ask the questions that I wanted to ask, but I did want to elaborate a little bit more with Mr. Allen as a very happy client of Add Energy. I have to say I am very interested in hearing a little more about what you're trying to do. This week at Industry, Science and Technology Committee, we heard a little bit about the opportunities that are in Canada with respect to natural resources for battery production. So for instance, we have a lot of resources in terms of lithium and graphite. And while we don't actually make the batteries, we assemble them here in Canada. And when you look at the roadmap for a renewed U.S.-Canada partnership and the Canada-U.S. Critical Minerals Action Plan, can you elaborate a little bit about how collaboration between Canada and the United States in terms of not only assembly but production of batteries, electric batteries for electric vehicles could help your company and expand, and how it could be a win-win opportunity for both Canada and the U.S.?
Thank you. Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, the opportunities right now with the change to electrified transportation writ large are so enormous. And I like to think about it in terms of a couple key parts. I mean, there's the vehicle assembly, right, which we've been, really, really fortunate to see great collaboration between Canada, Ontario, and the big automakers. We see the clean energy piece where Canada is unbelievably blessed with hydropower, nuclear power, lots of renewables across the country that we can use here and export to the US. And then I really think there's two more pieces to have sort of critical North American energy independence when it comes to transportation. And one of those is being able to build the charging stations that we need to turn that clean energy into, charging the batteries, which is what we do. And then the other one is the massive opportunity around batteries. And Canada has so many of the minerals and metals that are needed, not just for batteries, but I should say also for charging stations. We use aluminum in ours. And that is a really great opportunity. And I think in particular, it's an integrated opportunity because I don't think it's going to be any one country. And I keep sort of coming back to the idea of an integrated North American market. We're going to have a lot of the pieces here in Canada Canada. There's probably going to be some pieces in the United States. And our best bet, frankly, is to go it together and allow for that integrated continental trade.
Thank you so much. So I actually am a member of parliament in Quebec. So of course, we were one of the provinces that really took advantage of the subsidies with respect to electrical vehicles, and the demand is incredibly high here in Quebec for those vehicles. Now, you talked about energy independence and you talked about North American, and Scotty Greenwood was here before us and talked a little bit about, when we're talking recovery and a green recovery, we really need to look at it from a North American perspective or more of Canada-US perspective rather than doing it alone. And as you said, there's so many opportunities for collaboration in that regard. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. As you know, in Budget 2021, we committed to supporting the establishment and growth of a domestic battery electric vehicle supply chain through a $5 billion investment in a net zero accelerator and the introduction of tax incentives and project scaling supports. How do you think these supports will help the electric vehicle sector?
I think those announcements will make a very important catalyzing role, I would say, in helping kick off a huge opportunity for Canada, not just to be changing its own transportation system, but actually to be getting some of the jobs and building the IP and the expertise that is the real opportunity, I would say, that is the crux of that. So it's very exciting, as well as prior announcements that the government has made and investments in charging and vehicle incentives for light, medium, and heavy duty.
Absolutely. And as you know, we
20 seconds, Ms. Romanow.
So Ottawa and Quebec made a recent historical announcement with respect to electric vehicles. So we do support that. And Mr. Sabat, I don't want to forget you. I just want to let you know, full disclosure, my brother worked at IPEX at one point. So thank you very much for presenting tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Romanow. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez deux.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you. I would like to come back to Mr. Allen from Mad Energy. It seems to me that I saw a number, and I'd like to see if you can confirm that. We're talking about 2,000 electric chargers that were submitted for the United States.
Par votre entreprise, bien sûr.
By your company, of course.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I answer the right question. Are you asking how many stations are in the Biden plan, or?
Ont été livrés.
How many have been delivered? How many were delivered by your company to the United States, charging stations?
Understood. Thank you. That's a great question. I think we're still in the hundreds right now. We've got stations all over the city of Los Angeles, which were a modification of the ones we designed for the city of Montreal. And LA specially asked if we could convert them for their street posts. And then we're also deploying, we'll be just deploying hundreds of stations in New York City in partnership with Con Ed, as well as many stations in the Midwest. So we anticipate big growth in the future.
The Biden government, the Biden administration announced that 645,000 vehicles were going to be converted. Do you think that this would provide a good business opportunity, and will the Buy American Act ruin that opportunity to come out of it well?
That is exactly our concern. And the number of stations that the government has announced their intention to build by 2030 is 500,000 stations. And the economic value of that is approximately $15 billion. So that, just to put it in perspective for a company like ours, is literally the greatest opportunity in the history of North America for our industry. That's what's at stake here in getting this right, and that's why we're so hopeful that a solution can be found on Buy America.
Merci, Monsieur Savard.
Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Mr. Cannings, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and I'll continue with Mr. Allen. Ms. Romanato was complaining that everybody was taking her questions and then she took mine. I was going to ask you basically the same question, but what I'll say first of all is, it's been very exciting here in British Columbia to see the rollout of charging stations, and some of that is due to the federal supports. But I see your charging stations popping up around my riding with great regularity, and I appreciate that. 5 years ago, I couldn't possibly have imagined buying an electric car in my riding because it's an 11-hour drive and there was hardly any charging stations, and now there's one in every little village. So thank you for being part of that. Just getting back to the value chain, or in terms of not just, as Ms. Romanato was saying, but in terms of making the EVs themselves, the batteries. I have graphite mine in my riding. What we've heard at the Natural Resources Committee is China controls much of that battery, that whole system, everything from taking, they don't have the minerals, but they buy the minerals and they create batteries and they control everything in the middle. And I'm just wondering what you see as a danger in terms of even your end of the business, but, having a North American value chain that we have to create to get China out of the equation.
The biggest risk that we see is, number one, inaction. That was the biggest problem, right? Allowing other countries and continents to move faster than Canada and the United States, because at a certain point you get a technological lead and a production scaling lead that is just unbeatable. And we're very fortunate to see that, the government of Canada, British Columbia, Quebec, California, and now luckily the US federal government have started to realize that in order to have the industry, you've got to get the deployments going. You've got to make people feel comfortable in adopting EVs in a North American driving context. And I think your example there was perfect. I mean, if you don't see charging stations where you want to go, it's going to be really tough to make the decision to adopt an EV. So I think urgent action is really probably the biggest issue and that we face.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. And I want to warmly thank all the witnesses for coming today and contributing to the progress of the study. I think it was very informative. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. We will suspend for a few moments just to allow the next panel to onboard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and you're on.
We are now resuming the meeting. I would like now to welcome each of the witnesses to the committee. From the Aluminum Association of Canada, we have Jean Simon, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Business Council of Canada, we have Trevor Kennedy, Director, Trade and International Policy. Monsieur Savard, vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Simon, you have 5 minutes.
For this invitation to share our industry's perspective on the Buy America program. Critical materials, secure supply chain, strategic needs for continental defense, green recovery, and transport electrification. Our metal, produced responsibly and with the lowest carbon footprint in the world, is at the forefront of solutions to the problems of today and tomorrow. The US market, to which nearly 80% of our aluminum is exported, is one of the major import markets in the world. Currently, smelters in the US produce about 1 million tons annually, while demand for primary metal is about 4.5 million tons annually. By 2030, that demand is expected to grow to about 7 million tons annually, while forecasts for primary production stall at about 1 million tons. This will increase the US supply gap and create more dependence on imports of primary metal. The 2.2 million tons that we ship each year will continue to find buyers despite a Buy America policy. We believe, however, that responsibly produced low-carbon aluminum should be the preferred choice in a green recovery. Indeed, a green recovery of the economy following the pandemic must be done by using responsibly produced materials and solutions with a low carbon footprint as much as possible. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves exporting jobs in return for carbon imports. For example, our competition in the US market comes mainly from the Middle East, Russia, and India. We believe that it's not in the interest of either the US or Canada to anchor stimulus programs on supply chains from politically unstable regions of the world and with a carbon footprint disproportionately larger than ours. Canada's less than 2 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminium draws the line easily compared to 7.5 in the Middle East and as much as 17 in China. While the challenges of energy, environmental protection, and the fight against climate change are at the heart of the American Recovery Plan, Canada must show the US the contribution it can make as an allied country by supplying eco-responsible materials and solutions, while setting an example through its own procurement policies. We must grow back the integrated North American economy together through investing in technology and partnering in the adoption of new green technologies. The signal must come through government procurement. We must be consistent with our reduction targets and leverage the recovery efforts and public spending to redirect the economy in the right direction. Beyond its traditional manufacturing base, the industry is poised to be an even more critical source of material for a range of future uses in a low-carbon world. In transport, because aluminum is lightweight, strong, and corrosion resistant, its use in aircraft manufacture allows planes to be more fuel efficient and to carry more weight safely. NASA's Orion spacecraft structures are made from an aluminum lithium alloy, as will Orion's next generation multi-purpose crew vehicles. Electric powered vehicles need to be lightweight, and by 2030, combustion cars are expected to be no more than 5% of the new vehicle market. Already today, aluminum in vehicles has reduced the carbon footprint by 20%. In renewables, the metal is a key material in a wide range of renewable energy systems, all the way from solar thermal collectors and power plants to wind turbines and photovoltaic systems. The US and Canada, amongst other governments, are working independently and together to ensure access to a reliable future supply of critical materials. This is a direct response to China's increasingly dominant state-funded presence in supply chains for critical minerals that are key to strategic industries such as defense, aerospace, and communications. Again, aluminum is one such material. Further, the processing of bauxite into the alumina required for aluminum production generates residual minerals, including magnesium, silicon dioxide, as well as titanium oxide and gallium nitride, both listed on the list of critical minerals established by the US and Canada. While we fully recognize the importance of economic recovery plans here and in the US, that opportunity is at risk from less sustainable sources of supply driven by very high levels of state support, in particular in China. Consequences of not addressing international market distortion should be clear. Subsidized aluminum from high CO2 emitting production systems will increasingly spill over into national and international markets, replacing well-paid jobs in often rural areas with higher CO2 emissions abroad, eroding robust industrial ecosystems and driving out sustainable domestic capacity and resilient supply chains in the US and Canada. In closing, Mr. Chair, I would like to remind you that the real issue we all share is that of Chinese domination and its effect on our markets. This hyper-subsidized production, as demonstrated by the OECD, is crushing our markets and decimating large industrial sectors such as aluminum, magnesium, semiconductors, and many others. We do have an enabling framework, CUSMA, and a context that should rally us, the North American recovery, with companies and well-paid middle-class workers whose footprint extends on both sides of our borders, all facing the same unfair competition, China. Now, more than ever, allied countries, integrated economies like Canada and the US, must work together to rebuild their economies with resilient, competitive, and sustainable continental strategic supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simard. We will now go to Mr. Kennedy for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for the invitation to take part in your meeting on Buy American and the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. The Business Council of Canada is composed of 150 chief executives and entrepreneurs of Canada's leading enterprises. Our member companies directly and indirectly support more than 6 million jobs across the country and hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Representing different industries and regions, these men and women are united in their commitment to improve the quality of life for all Canadians. So we know that Canada is a trading nation. Our prosperity and living standards rely on it. 65% of our GDP is tied directly to trade, and the bulk of this trade is with the United States. As of 2020, it accounted for 73% of Canada's merchandise exports and 53% of our services exports. 2 million Canadian jobs are related to exports with the United States, and this relationship is mutually beneficial. Nearly 9 million jobs in the United States depend on cross-border trade and investment with Canada, and we're the largest or among the largest export partners for most states. Given the importance of this relationship for our shared prosperity, during CUSMA negotiations, the business community on both sides of the border advocated for a do-no-harm approach and to modernize certain elements of the 25-year-old NAFTA, the basis for most of our bilateral trade. The Council and many of our American counterparts were pleased with the new agreement in both its substance and because it was able to bring on a wider range of stakeholders on board. The level of bipartisan and key stakeholder support for this agreement in the US right now is remarkable, especially given the current political circumstances south of the border. While CUSMA's government procurement chapter does not apply to Canada-US trade, the overarching goal of the agreement was to enhance North American competitiveness in manufacturing, among other areas, while supporting well-paying jobs. We believe the direction taken on Buy American by the new administration, which happens to broadly support CUSMA and its objectives, undermines the success of this critical agreement. Bilateral challenges related to Buy American are certainly not new. However, the timing and approach of the latest proposed actions in the executive order and in the American Jobs Plan go against the spirit of CUSMA, as well as many of the shared objectives for bilateral cooperation, including in the roadmap for renewed U.S.-Canada partnership and priorities outlined in the U.S.-Canada high-level ministerial dialogue on climate ambition. It's critical that Canada secures an exemption or a clear carve-out. Tighter application of Buy American rules and restrictions related to the American Jobs Plan will not only harm Canadian, but also American workers. CUSMA created a strong, resilient, and competitive regional supply chain. Proposed changes could harm trade and investment in Canada and fragment American supply chains at a time when we need to work together to address economic resiliency and environmental challenges. Canada faced a formidable challenge at the outset of CUSMA negotiations, but with a proactive and coordinated Team Canada approach that involved the business community and labor, among others, we were able to overcome and emerge with an outcome that benefited people on both sides of the border. If we're to be successful this time around, we need to take a similar approach and to do so with urgency. This effort should be directed at the White House, Congress, state and municipal officials, and most importantly, be in alignment with US stakeholders in business and labor. Canada should not challenge Buy American as a concept. We'll lose that argument. Rather, we need to make the case that working with Canada, given its unique integrated nature, the unique integrated nature of our economies, is key to achieving the procurement policy's goal of ensuring strong and resilient supply chains, as well as well-paying jobs. The Business Council of Canada and its members stand ready to support a Team Canada approach, and I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. We will go directly to questions for the first round. Ms. Alice Lau for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to both the witnesses for very important and enlightening testimony. I would like to start with Mr. Simard, if I could. During COVID, we have certainly seen that there's a predisposition to self-sufficiency and the need for a domestic capability during times of challenge. And you, Mr. Simard, have just effectively outlined why aluminum is critical and perhaps why the United States recently put national security tariffs on aluminum. I'm wondering if you could give us some insight into the impact of those national security tariffs on the aluminum industry.
Thank you for this question. First of all, I must say that those tariffs, due to all the efforts that were undertaken by the Government of Canada and Mrs. Freeland when she was responsible for the file, are now off for Canada. So we're in a tariff-free situation. And basically, the impact of tariffs was mostly on the U.S. side. It's a law of unintended consequences, but economic history has shown that most of the time the impact of tariffs are on the imposing party, which meant that in this case, the US was the most expensive place in the world to buy aluminium.
And so thank you very much. My research, though, shows that there were actually a significant number of manufacturing jobs in the aluminum industry created in the United States as a result of those national security tariffs. So I wonder if that was not a precursor in many ways to showing where the Americans were wanting to go on this. Because while you say that there is that gap between, I think you said 1 million and possibly the growth to 7 million requirement for it domestically, they're looking to put some of that capability back in the US. Would you have a feel for how much of Canada's domestic aluminum requirements are met by Canadian manufacturers?
It's a complex question, although it doesn't sound like it, because it's a complex market. We're primary producers, so we produce from alumina through the electrolysis process, aluminium that is then reprocessed and ends up in cars, planes, and consumer goods. Canada as a country on a yearly basis probably consumes about 700,000 tons of metal, which doesn't mean that that metal is produced in Canada. It's primary metal that is consumed in Canada in terms of reprocessing through the value chain. So
would we have the potential to be self-sufficient in aluminum if we required it?
We're not a market. We're too small. It's all a matter of critical mass. Okay. And that's why we're producing primary metal that we're shipping there where the market is, and that's where it's reprocessed. And the jobs created in the United States are created in the downstream part of the value chain, okay, not as much in the upstream where we are.
Okay, so in this committee, obviously in this study, we're not talking about Buy America writ large. We're talking about in federal infrastructure projects for the most part. So you listed a bunch of other things like aerospace and all those critical things, but those won't necessarily be affected. Do you have a feel for what percentage of the 2.2 million that we export goes to those federal infrastructure projects? So in other words, what is really at risk in terms of that 2.2 million if we're not successful in achieving an exemption?
As mentioned at the beginning, the 2.2 million, because of the demand in the US market and the incapacity structurally for the US to respond to its own domestic demand, the 2.2 million will still go to the US. The problem is downstream. So it's Canadian companies using Canadian metal that are pushing the metal to the US to contribute to infrastructure projects or federally sponsored undertakings. That's where the hit will be more so than upstream. The metal will always find its way to the US. The problem is the small mom and pop shops that make parts and components that are used in tramway projects or city transit systems that are federally sponsored. That's
so
where
if
it will.
We're not
Ms. Alice,
successful.
a quick question, 25 seconds, please.
Thanks. So if we're not successful, what is the impact and what's the plan B?
Again, I think success is more important for downstream players than for primary producers. Our metal will still go to the market because the market requires it.
Thank you, Ms. Alislav. We'll now go to Madam Mendayan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses as well. I did just want to begin by clarifying a comment made earlier. I too watched President Biden's address, as did many in our government, and I believe last night in addressing Congress, President Biden was referring to Buy American, not Buy America, and specifically to his concern about one-off exemptions being given in a discretionary manner for certain contracts, which is not the topic of our study today. As all members know, and I'm sure our witnesses as well, we are looking at Buy America and potential measures that may be imposed with respect to those. So an important distinction there. J'aimerais peut-être commencer.
I would like to perhaps begin with Mr. Simard in order to speak as a proud Quebecer of our aluminum industry. It's certainly a matter of pride for all of us. And according to the information I have, Quebec produces roughly 3 million tons per year, which represents roughly 60% of the entire production capacity of North America. And we often say this, and you even referred to Quebec aluminum, that it is the greenest aluminum in the world. And I wonder whether you have communicated previously with your American counterparts on that subject to get them to understand the value of our aluminum from an environmental viewpoint.
Pardon, merci.
Thank you for that question. I would simply like to correct the figures to start with. In Canada, we produce 3.2 million tons of metal, and in Quebec, we produce about 2.8 million. So roughly 90%, nevertheless, of Canadian production is set up in Quebec, and we export from year to year roughly about 80 to 90% of it per year of the entire Canadian production toward the American market. Simply to clarify things, yes, we do have ties. I'm in contact as a representative of the industry on a weekly basis with my American counterparts, the American Aluminum Association, which represents the interests of the American industry. It's a pleasure for me to confirm to you that in the industry, there's been a perfect alignment over the last 3, 4, 5 years regarding trade issues on either side of the border. We recognize to begin with that we're part of an integrated continent-wide chain, and we need each other on both sides of the border for the work that's done on either side. Metal has to travel before it ends up in its final purpose between 7 and 11 times. It crosses the border back and forth. So before the metal is manufactured in the Saguenay, that's poured in the Saguenay, arrives at its final destination in a Ford 150, it may cross the border many times, which explains how complex our value chain is and how important it is to protect its integrity. From our viewpoint, the Buy America, as opposed to Buy American process, is not liable to affect the transit of primary metal toward the U.S. because, as I illustrated at the beginning, the needs are huge in terms of the imports of aluminum for the Americans. Where it could have an impact, it has much more to do with the products that come from that metal, which could be, I don't know, for example, in Add Energy's recharging stations, it's Canadian aluminum that's used. So how can all of that materialize in the final product? That remains to be seen. Thank you. And in response to a question earlier, you referred to the fact that our government was able to raise the aluminum import duties. As a team, as a country, we've done this hand in hand with our industry. And based on that success, in your opinion, would it be a good thing to align ourselves with government representatives at all levels and with our partners in the private sector in order to approach the United States as a team? I think that if we base things on past successes in the course of negotiations of CUSMA and the raising of the tariffs, the Canadian, or lifting of the tariffs, Canada's presence in the industry in the sector at various levels and in various regards in a sustained level certainly contributed to making a difference. Power in the United States is highly concentrated, but at the same time, it is also quite spread out. The influence occurs at various levels, the interplay of influence in various bodies, and Canada's recipe that was brought in under the Trudeau administration to have more and more exchanges and discussions through different ministers, senators, parliamentarians, and so on to keep the discussion going through those ties, then in these files to try to lessen the differences. I think that's the secret to success, and I strongly encourage you to continue using that method, that recipe that has proven itself.
Thank you. Thank you. We will now go to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to our witnesses. Well, I would also like to turn to, as a Quebec MP, as a Bloc MP, as you know, last year, a lot of focus was placed on aluminum and the trade discussions leading to CUSMA. Mr. Simard, I wanted to ask you how you wanted to get the green nature of the aluminum recognized by the U.S., and you answered that in part. I'd like to ask you, as you illustrated, regarding the complex value chain that is a market that's highly integrated and that is multidimensional, so to speak. Precisely last year, we pushed in the Bloc for recognition for a formula that you welcomed with the association when we put that forward, a formula connected with rules of origin. So with that new issue concerning the U.S. border and with Buy American, the issue of dumping because we're talking about green aluminum as compared to aluminum that's much produce a lot more pollution that comes up from China through Mexico. Is there an issue connected with that in the specific aspect of recognition of aluminum by the U.S. as being connected to green energy? It is a multifaceted question. First of all, just briefly, if we turn to the free trade agreement, normally the countries are called upon to adopt watchdog systems, as Canada did very quickly. And in fact, we were the first country to move forward with that. The Americans have just brought that in March, their own import watchdog system for aluminum. And the latecomer remains Mexico for various reasons. And now we're going to have to arrange for Canada and the U.S. to work as a team to pressure Mexico to make sure that they close that door, which could potentially enable fraudulent imports to occur. Recognition of the low carbon footprint of our metal by the U.S. administration, all of that is a question, I believe, of, how should I say this, process over time. As we speak, international financial markets are recognizing the carbon footprint of aluminum, increasingly so, as part of the cost of financing projects. So if you have a project to buy or low carbon footprint aluminum, or you want to increase your capacity, your financing cost could be lower on international markets because now these are parts of the risk factors that are analyzed from the viewpoint of purchases by governments. I believe that we, as a country, we cannot force or try to get the United States to take into account that concept unless we set the example. So the Canadian government and the provincial governments increasingly would have to take into account the carbon footprint of products through their own supply systems to make it possible to say after that to their partners to do the same thing. That is fundamental. Until such time as we use our supply rules in order to recognize low carbon footprint supply products, it's very difficult to tell others to do it. So the basis to arriving at that and to be able to come out ahead in dealing with the United States, because that's the topic being studied today, would be for us ourselves to demonstrate what you call setting the example, to have a deep reform of our own domestic policies. Yes, it has to be done gradually. You cannot do it overnight, but it can be done and has been done elsewhere around the world. Elsewhere in the world. Okay, thank you. And you also acknowledge the agreement between the U.S. and Canada. Let's call that the greening of government activities, so to speak. Let's just call it that for the moment. No doubt, in view of the fact that you have quite green aluminum, it would enable us to have easier access. Would this simplify things if the criteria were mandatory? If we went a step further, would it open up more possibilities for our aluminum, which is has the lowest carbon footprint in the world, as opposed to potential competitors? Restrictions are always a market impact that has negative impacts. We've often seen that, like with tariffs. When we use restrictions as a leverage in markets that need a great deal of fluidity, ultimately, everyone ends up paying for it, and I cannot say I'm in favor of that. At the same time, though, we could say that there are environmental commitments that would not really be recognized. It could become just symbolic. In other words, what was understood between Canada and the U.S. Nevertheless, there has to be a certain level of restriction, it seems to me, in order to arrive at a situation where we really do favor green technologies. Well, green technologies are really, and energy. Yes, but if you look, for example, at why is it that now we look at a technology in Canada and in Quebec? Well, we're talking about several things. There's the carbon market that's coming in, the carbon price, which is going up over the course of time, the need to have a technological breakthrough and government support, financial support, in order to help the private sector to develop and ultimately deploy this breakthrough technology. What we have to note is that when you arrive at that limit in major industrial sectors, it's impossible for the private sector to mobilize the required financial effort, and at the same time, it's in the interest of the governments who are seeking to bring down the carbon footprint around the planet, not to impose restrictions, but to facilitate the development of these solutions through assistance. Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
You have 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to Mr. Kennedy at first. And, you counseled us, I think, to not go after the Buy America plan head on, but to, when in dealing with the United States, talk about the integrated nature of our trade, how closely tied all those supply chains and value chains are. But when I think of, again, coming from British Columbia, one of the big issues here is that softwood lumber disagreement. And here we have a situation where the United States clearly needs our lumber, but we have a very vocal, very powerful set of businesses in the United States that are producing lumber that seem to have the ear of every government in the United States over the past 30 years. So why hasn't this argument worked with them? Here we have a case where we're paying illegal tariffs and lumber prices are going through the roof because demand is so high. So why hasn't that argument worked, and how can we perhaps reshape it when we're talking about Buy America or a new softwood lumber agreement?
That's a very good question, and it's in some ways similar to this problem because this is a long-term issue we've had with the United States, both in softwood lumber and on procurement policy, a fundamental disagreement. I wouldn't try to represent the industry's view on what the preferred path forward is, but the more recent signals we're seeing from the U.S. is an interest in a new agreement between Canada and the U.S. I'm not sure how serious that is, but at least there's been comments from the new USTR in that space, and to the extent that that would be helpful. But it has been a challenge. We always struggle to raise our issues at the American level. We're dealing with local constituencies and business groups. This came up in the steel and aluminum case with Section 232 tariffs, where there were specific businesses that had a key interest, and they were able to drive federal policy in a way that worked against, I would argue, American national interest. And we're seeing a very similar pattern with softwood lumber right now. We know very clearly the Home Builders Association in the United States has been very vocal. And to a point now where I don't want to misquote the numbers, but adding $20,000 to $30,000 on top of a house at a time when housing prices are so high is absurd. So, I'm hopeful that we can reach a conclusion. That does seem to be one area where the administration has at least signaled an openness to dealing with Canada, and hopefully we can make progress.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn now to Monsieur Simard, and it's kind of a similar question in that we've, in the previous round of witnesses, we talked to Mr. Allen from Ad Energy in Quebec, with charging stations. We talked a bit about in that value chain, again, the supply chain of the critical minerals and metals that we need to electrify the energy systems in North America. And I'm just wondering how much you would put on a strategy to create a North American critical metal and mineral supply chain so that we could make every component for batteries, every component for electric motors, all those things. And he was using aluminum in his charging stations, for instance. So is that a strategy we could use to go to the United States and say, we have to take those value chains away from China? They dominate them now. And use our aluminum, our copper, our cobalt, our lithium, our graphite in a North American sense, and really create a market within the continent that would help both countries in this transition to a cleaner future.
There's already, I believe, a joint agreement between the US and Canada that was announced on critical materials. We share most of the same minerals or materials on both the European, the US list. Canada's list of 32 or 33 critical minerals is quite the same. And we have trade agreements with the US and we have with Europe. So it's like a magic thread to grow our way out of China in a very strategic part of our economies for the future. We can work with the US. We've shown it in the past. We're part of the US military and technology industrial base. We have 50 years of history of working together in highly strategic undertakings, research and development related to the space program, aerospace. I see no reason why we wouldn't be able to do something very constructive and something that would bring us back together, looking at the needs of our joint economy for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Looking at the time, members, it looks like we will have to stop at the first round because, as you know, today we have scheduled some committee business. You can use the separate link to go into committee. On behalf of the committee, Mr. Simard and Mr. Kennedy, we want to thank you very warmly for coming here and illuminating us on the issues that are important to your industries and to the Business Council. So thank you very much and have a great weekend. Members, you can now go on to the other link.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.